For the past 3 weeks, there have been protests against police brutality in response to multiple police killings of African Americans. But there are incidents of everyday racism that continue to be recorded and shared online. Here's one that happened last week in San Francisco when a white couple called the police after they saw a man, a person of color, writing "Black Lives Matter" in chalk onto the side of his own property.
Hi, I'm asking you if this is your property.
Why are you asking?
Because it's private property.
Because it's private property, sir.
So, are you defacing private property, or is this your building?
If I did live here and it was my property, this would be absolutely fine.
Totally.
And you don't know if I live here or if this is my property.
We actually do know. That's why we're asking.
Oh, really? Because you live here, right? You said so.
Because we know the person who does live here.
Oh, okay.
So
then I suggest you call him or call the police. Or
call the police.
because you're accusing me of a crime, correct?
What is your first name, sir?
I'm not answering. I'm not talking to you. You're talking to me. I'm asking you the questions.
Well, we're not doing anything illegal.
Neither am I.
Actually,
you are actually.
Really? Oh, okay. Well, then call the cops.
Thank you. We will do so.
Lisa and Robert.
Yeah.
I'll be right here.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Bye. And that, people, is why Black Lives Matter.
James Wanilo, who is Filipino and identifies as a person of color, this is him, has lived in San Francisco in his home of nearly 20 years. He said when the police eventually did show up, they recognized him immediately and left without getting out of their car. The couple has since apologized. The man in the video has been fired from his job at Raymond James, the financial firm. Joining me now to talk about this is Christian Cooper, who just went through this very thing 3 weeks ago. He was bird watching in New York Central Park, which is what he does, when a white woman called the police on him, knowing that she was being taped doing this after he asked her to leash her dog, which is what you're supposed to do in Central Park. The incident happened a few hours before George Floyd was killed. Also joining me is MSNBC correspondent Tremaine Lee, who has reported extensively on these microaggressions, these everyday instances of racism in 2018 for MSNBC's Emmy-nominated special, Everyday Racism. Thank you to both of you for being here. Mr. Cooper, let me just start with you, because your incident was more sinister. A woman called the police and said that you were threatening her life, which as a black man in America could actually cause you to lose your life.
Well, she was very specific also about mentioning that I'm an African-American man several times on the call, with the expectation that that would bring the cops whistling down on my head with special vengeance. So, yes, it was more sinister, potentially with more deadly consequences. I don't like to speculate as to whether or not that was more deadly consequences were going to happen. But what's really revelatory is that she went there, that in that moment, when she was looking to get an edge in our confrontation, she decided to go to that dark racial place. And it's interesting in this example that we just saw from San Francisco. I love how that guy handled it, because he did exactly everything I think you're supposed to do. He did not grant them any power over him. He did not feel obliged to answer any of their questions. He just continued to do what he knew he was entitled to do and let them go off and do what they thought they needed to do. And they're suffering the consequences for that.
But it could go the other way. That's the danger, right? He said something interesting. I had somebody tweet me and say, why didn't he just tell him that that was his place? Tell me why why people of color don't have to do that. They don't have to answer those questions about whether this is my place or not.
Because for the same reason that I didn't stop recording the scofflaw behavior I was capturing on my iPhone when that woman threatened to call the police on me and told them an African-American man was threatening her life. Because you don't participate in your own dehumanization. You don't give them the power to determine your actions when you're not doing anything wrong, to alter your behavior, to comply to their wishes, to give in to their desire to be satisfied, to be comforted, to have their unwarranted fears placated by you justifying your existence. You just don't do it. It's against any principle of human dignity.
Tremaine Lee, you actually documented these things. You've talked about these things. Some people call them microaggressions, but microaggressions is a difficult term because it seems micro, it seems small. The consequences of these things, including what happened to Mr. Cooper, could be very consequential. He says he doesn't want to speculate, but we see enough evidence that when somebody calls and says there's an African-American man who's threatening my life, that could be dangerous.
These everyday forms of racism or microaggression, they happen so routinely that they almost seem benign, but they are anything but. When you call for an armed response for people sitting in a Starbucks or sleeping in your dorm room or renting an Airbnb or bird watching in Central Park, you are immediately putting that man's life in danger. And any interaction with police and black folks, especially given how we've been criminalized over time, we've seen these outcomes. And we also like to give cute names. We call them Karen, or you'll find some way to kind of poke fun at it. But this is really dangerous, and we've seen it time and again. Let's think about John Crawford just a few years ago in a Walmart who picked up a toy gun off the shelf, and within seconds, police arrived and shoot him dead because he was being targeted and followed by customers inside because of fear of some shoplifting or what. Again, his own flesh was criminalized. So it happens so often, we think it's nothing, but these are part of a bigger spoke that once they get rolling, we've seen some very, very dangerous outcomes.
Mr. Cooper, I'm sorry to talk about you in the third person while Tremaine's here. I know that that's not, you're here and you can answer for yourself. The woman who did this to you has apologized. The woman who did this to the gentleman in San Francisco has apologized. Both of them have suffered consequences, as have their, in the case of the woman in San Francisco, her husband was fired from his job as well. What is supposed to happen? Do you think that there's a lesson to be learned by everybody who sees these videos, that I'm full of these little racist sentiments? Because I think people are uncomfortable with the idea that they might actually be racists.
Well, we all make assumptions. That's human nature. We look at people and we judge based on how they present themselves, their hair, their clothes, all sorts of manner of presentation. We make snap judgments about people. That's human nature. That's not going to change. The problem with it is that people in these cases are not just making snap judgments based on clothes or hair, but also on skin color. That becomes another factor. And the other problem is that when these snap judgments are made, too often they lead to dire consequences like the death of George Floyd or the death particularly of Ahmaud Arbery, who was the young man who went jogging in Georgia and was chased down by two white guys in a white van simply for going jogging because they made an assumption based on his skin color that he was up to no good, and he ended up dead. And they self-defense and almost got away with it. So I guess the point is we all make assumptions, but you've got to check yourself. If you're going to make an assumption, before you make that stupid, boneheaded comment, before you insert yourself into the situation, check yourself. And why am I doing this? Why am I making is race really a factor here? And 9 times out of 10, I think you might find, unfortunately, yes.